everyone, and welcome to our first session today, which is Pharma's Next Normal. Are we Titanic or a speedboat? A pleasure to welcome three extraordinary panelists today. So first of all, I would like to introduce Francesca Wutke, the Chief Digital Officer from Almirall. Hi, Francesca, how are you?
Hi, Dario. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Florent Edouard, the Senior Vice President and Global Commercial Head of Grünenthal. Hi, Florent, how are you?
Hi, nice to meet you.
And same question for you, Timothy. Pleasure to meet you, Timothy White, the Head of Digital from Teva.
Hi, Dario. Good to see you.
Great. So let's kick off. And we all know we prepared, of course, for this interesting session. And I would first like to ask you one very important question. And this is a year ago, digital transformation accelerated dramatically. Where are we today? And what are the key learnings so far? Who would like to start first? Maybe we can start with Francesca.
Well, yeah, it's certainly been an interesting year on I think in every single aspect. There's been an enormous transformation out of pure necessity. I think, you know, for many of us across Europe and really across the world, we've been largely cut off from interactions with our key stakeholders, either physicians or patients. So it was incumbent upon us to think of creative solutions to regain some of that access. My hope is that people over this past year, almost a year to the day, have become quite accustomed to a very different way of working, a different way of interacting, and that will persist over time.
Thank you, Francesca. Tim?
Yeah, I think when I'm to reflect a lot on the changes that have happened in this last year, I actually think a lot about people. As much as digital is sort of the name of the game and everybody has gone this direction, I think, and also reflecting on your first comments, on the one hand, it's been such a strange customer experience shift for our customers. So we're used to maybe, face-to-face conferences, reps, all of this, just something completely different. And in some ways, just how they've adapted to that and the shift that they've made in terms of expectation and future outlook. And then on the other hand, organizationally, and something that I believe a lot is that transformation has to happen from within, and I think this definitely did prove to a lot of folks that we're probably capable of much more and moving much faster than we would have been, and it was just a matter of pushing out of the comfort zone. So from leadership on down, I think this has been just an amazing experiment in terms of seeing how fast we could go. And then I can't help but agree with Francesca there that, what will be the interesting thing to see is now over this next, 9, 12 months, where do we kind of come back to and what that's going to look like? And are we agile enough to adapt to whatever that change is going to look like, in the more lasting term?
Thank you, Tim. Florent?
Well, the first thing is the whole pharma didn't go bankrupt. Far from that. I think, it's an interesting change in vision on who pharma is and what we deliver to the society, which is very important, even if there are some turbulences in terms of deliveries and what's so. But I think also, what this period has shown us is that the carryover on chronic disease is quite important, and that the patients, like, for instance, in Italy, who had the chance to be, or in Spain, who had the chance to be able to get refill without going to see the doctor, could still keep and take their medication. So that's very important. What we saw, I think, is in the acute setting, a big impact. The new patients went down. The people who needed applications couldn't go to the physician. And more importantly, in terms of screening, what we see is in the cancer space, a lot of people didn't get screened, which will have a tail end effect and very bad effect for patients themselves. So I think it's a bit a critical situation that forces us to react. The upside would be the development of remote medicine, where I think this gives us hope that we can get better treated for simple procedure and operations, and reserve space for deeper diagnostic analysis and support to the patients. But definitely a game changer.
Thank you. And can you maybe mention one single thing which you learned most, or what changed you most in the last 1 year? One single thing, if possible.
I think the resilience of the human race, because this is something that impacted all of us, and I remember and was commenting with both my colleagues and my team, as well as with my family, on March 13th a year ago. We were told we had to start lockdown, and we said, wow, it's going to last 2 weeks. That's amazing. How could we ever do that? And then a year later, we're more or less largely where we were. So I think that human beings have an enormous capacity to change, to adapt to different situations, for good or for bad. But I think there are a lot of learnings there that that we can apply to our day-to-day business, in terms of doing things differently, forcing change upon our teams. Even something as silly as changing the narrative around technology. I had a quite senior member of the organization say to me, I got onto Teams by myself, and I shared my screen in my presentation, whereas in the past his assistant would have done that on his behalf. So that allowed us to have a conversation about digital health, which isn't enabled by technology, but isn't technology itself. That may not have been possible otherwise. So I think leveraging the learning agility that we've all had over this year for the good of society, as Florent mentioned, and the good of all of our organizations is for me a key learning.
Tim, Florent?
I think if I were to really boil it down to one thing, it's probably that speed is more easily achieved than I think we would have believed. And I think there's something to be said about the industry we work in being, slow in its design. I mean, you think about the clinical trial process, bringing a product to market takes 10 years, right? Or more. And I think that had for years almost an undue effect on other parts of the value chain that didn't necessarily have to go at that pace. It's obviously for the right reasons. Although even that, if you look at the vaccine development, we've proven we can probably go much faster than we would have previously thought. So when I say speed, I really mean that I think the organization was able to say, we can prioritize moving fast in certain cases to achieve progress, rather than sort of the slow and steady wins the pace. And I think that insight, that learning organizationally, if we harness that, should help take the entire industry probably in a very healthy direction in terms of new medicines, new ways of interacting with patients, new ways of interacting with healthcare professionals for the foreseeable future.
Florent?
I think a key learning is nearly an existential learning, is don't take anything for granted. We took culture for granted, we took parties for granted, we took all that for granted. We took our customers for granted. Like, we will always be able to access to them. Yeah, access is reducing, blah, blah, blah. Then suddenly, bing, nothing. You can get to your customers. Wow. So that means you always need a plan B, of course, but also you need to be really careful, create the right relationship, and good relationships are based on good customer experience. So I think that's also one of the things which has made us realize we need to redirect our energy toward creating good customer experiences.
Next question, how will engagement look like in the next normal from digital and the commercial perspective? Florent, let's stay with you.
So in the next normal, so what we see from all the surveys coming from everywhere, from the direct contact we got with our physicians, there will be far more on-demand digital interactions. The doctors, the nurses, they want to consume content where they want, when they want, on the channel that they want. And we need to offer that or we become irrelevant. So that's really a huge difference. That doesn't mean we can't have strategy. That does not mean we can, be smart and be able to push our marketing thinking. But definitely that's a game changer, and it's going to happen everywhere. In the hospitals, in the private practice, I think that's a huge difference. They will lead, and we have to provide.
Yeah, so I mean, I really agree with Florent here, I should just say. I mean, that's also what all the data and not just data, the sort of insights you get in speaking with customers. And I think there was something to be said about like the first 2 to 3 months of the pandemic, when, oh my gosh, we have to go digital. And then everybody just ran to implement, reps behind iPad detailing sort of solutions, and there's plenty of them out there. And then we realized, I think after a bit, and I'm saying we in the greatest sense of the industry here, not necessarily Teva and ourselves, that that probably isn't A, it's not enough, and B, sometimes it feels like we're kind of putting a square peg in a round hole. And actually, back to Florent's point, it comes down to value and what value you're actually providing to a physician. And so if the value that the rep was providing before was a cup of coffee, a nice chat, and some scientific exchange, that's going to be kind of tricky to replicate in a setting like this. But if the value can be something more, and especially digitally, when we're used to receiving value in all sorts of different ways, on demand, tailored exactly how we want it, then I think that that will probably be the more sustainable approach and win. And I think you've seen that. I mean, the numbers, initial days, there was a lot of remote calls and all of that, and then it sort of started to level out, and it became more about virtual congresses, virtual events like this, because there's value exchange created. And then increasingly, a lot of companies, including ourselves, are getting much more heavily into the on-demand space, both for content, but also for services, and even some transactional things, for other customers where, they need to have service almost instantaneously. So I'm excited about the future. I think it's much more nuanced. Than simply reps behind webcams. But I think whatever it's going to be, it will be value producing and value providing to our customers, and certainly very much on demand, per Florent's point. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm fully in agreement with what both of my colleagues have said. I think that initially there was this massive wave of webinars. I think within a very short amount of time, we as a as the pharma industry, as well as the physicians who were ingesting all of this information, made it very clear to us that unless we were providing compelling value-added information, that they were simply not interested. So it wasn't just doing stuff for the sake of doing it, but it was really understanding our customers and our stakeholders and figuring out how we can best add value. I think this on-demand component, in retrospect, it wasn't at the time, but in retrospect seems quite obvious, because it is how we ingest information in our non-work lives. So why wouldn't it be the same, in our professional lives as well? And so creating that kind of Netflix type catalog for physicians is really a key offering, and that allows some degree of differentiation by therapeutic area, by company, by product. And also, is respectful of the healthcare providers' times, in an especially difficult time to practice medicine.
Thank you. Any other comments, team, Florent, on that?
No, I think, yeah, no, nothing to add for this one.
No, I think so either. Yeah, it's pretty well said. No.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very good. And a line summary, I think. Yeah.
Okay. If some things will move back to the normal, with a huge, bold statement on if, how to maintain that level of transformation to build on these foundations which we set?
Well, so maybe I can go further. I think, for me, really, now we know that customer experience would be paramount, and we know that this is a buzzword. We all need to be educated there. Just when you see the discussions around how do you just measure customer experience. Is doing survey the only way we can measure actually the customer experience? That's the thing that's going to change the game. That's where we can focus, and literally that's a whole company. I would say strategic objective, because it needs to come from the top. Because you can't build good customer experience in 3 months. And it's not like you're coming out of the blue and suddenly, we have 10, 20 years of legacy, relationship with those people, and they have memories. So we really need to get the whole company on board, because if people start to ask return on investment on customer experience after 3 months, that's, definitely shooting ourselves in the foot.
Thank you. Tim?
I think, and it's probably just almost a build off of that. The value of the digital relationship and that is of course established through customer experience. But of course, in the past, I think a lot of relationships with our sector would be on an individual level, notably between sort of rep and physician, and the little black book of the rep having all of their contacts, which, don't get me wrong, is still really critical, and I think it is going to be very important. But you could see, I even look within our own organization, the countries that had kind of prioritized building digital relationships in the years before COVID had things like a lot of the housekeeping things you need, like consent and connectivity. I mean, even, dare I even say, just, the email address, right? And all of these things are foundational to having a relationship between a brand and an individual in the digital space. And I think that has kind of that's a learning that will be maintained, that you can't just flip a switch on a digital relationship. It's probably just a subtly different way of talking about what Florent is mentioning. But it does come down to that a lot of those foundational components need to be in place, and really what it means to establish a digital relationship needs to be understood before you can sort of work towards gaining value or even, dare I say, competitive advantage from it.
And Tim, I think that's you pointed out an excellent piece of allowing for all of these digital interventions. You need the basics, and whether it's preparing for the future, whatever that the uncertain future may be, or dealing with whatever is in front of you when the floor comes out from under you, and something as basic as emails and consents. I had a similar experience in the countries where that was established. We've achieved a level of digital interaction that is far superior to others where we had to start very much from scratch, and start initially in a difficult situation trying to gather those opt-ins and those email addresses and that way of communicating. So I think we're going forward going to be far more aware of how to maintain a digital connectivity with our key stakeholders, what that means for them. There's another piece that we found to be incredibly useful that I think we were under leveraging, quite frankly, before, and that's peer-to-peer advocacy. So having physicians speak to their counterparts and their colleagues on either on our behalf or on the behalf of patients or on the behalf of the therapeutic area, to help disseminate information, and then really taking single pieces of data or information and parsing it into a variety of different types of content and sources of content. So you can take, for example, a publication and make mini video pills. You can have interviews with physicians. You can have an ad board that can be aired for others to see. You can have interactions between physician and patient groups. You can do infographics. There's a variety of different things. In one example, we took one publication and got about 40 pieces of content out of it, so that whatever resonates with an individual physician, they can interact with, and do it sort of categorically by different aspects, whether it's a safety concern or an efficacy concern or a therapeutic area, or how it differentiates from other modalities, so that physicians can go in and, again, back to the on-demand issue, very quickly get to the information that they're looking for, that's most germane to them.
Definitely. We got a very interesting question: how to reduce focus on technology as a silver bullet and drive adaptation and orchestration among sales teams? Quite interesting question.
I can maybe make a small plug for my session tomorrow morning or tomorrow afternoon. I'll talk a little bit about this then. I think one of the important things is to get the organization thinking about what it should look like, actually, and ask that question. So instead of saying, like, we need to implement this, say, like, well, what do you want your customer to experience, actually? And then you can work back to the tech. And ideally, in a real state, you'd even say, what do you want this to look like in sort of 2, 3, 5 years? I get your point, Dario. We're not always the best at making predictions, but at least to have a view of where you're headed, it kind of then removes the tech from the picture. And then you go, well, actually other sectors create that, and they use tech that's fairly standard to do it, and so then we can implement accordingly. But then you start talking about the business, not the technology. So always talk about what you want it to look like, and also then tying that to sort of the business challenge and what you're trying to achieve. And if you do those two things, technology then takes more downstream discussion versus the upfront.
Thank you. Florent, Francesca.
Just to build on this one, with the lockdown, I started running, and I started to run with the Nike Running Club app.
Oh.
And there's one guy called Coach Bennett, and Coach Bennett every time tells me, you're going to do this run to become a better version of yourself. And I think that's exactly the right approach with the sales team. We need to explain to them and make them feel that they become better advisors to doctors because they are able to use the technology that the doctor wants to use, to see the content that the doctor wants to see. And then they buy in, and then they support and they evolve and they change. So I think that's a very simple advice, but I found it very useful.
And I think that's beautifully put. All of these tools can empower and enable our reps to have different interactions with physicians. But as with changing our commercial business models, we've also done a lot of changes within the digital health ecosystem more broadly. And I feel strongly, it's not driven by tech, but it's enabled by tech. I think that what drives it is the desire to change and to do better, to Florent's point. And then once we have that, as Tim said, we can always find the tech solution. That's not what's holding us back. It's a desire to do things differently and to get better customer insights in this case.
Okay. So we are coming to the end. Thank you very much, Tim, Florent, and Francesca. It was really a great pleasure. Looking forward to the next session, and of course, stay in this event and follow some very interesting and intriguing sessions. Also, I heard we have some technical issues. Why? I really don't know, because we are really using an amazing tool, which is Hopin, which is, by the way, the fastest growing unicorn from Europe ever. And we are trying to resolving this. However, all of the sessions are recorded, and they will also be available on our YouTube channel. So don't worry, and I'm pretty sure that the connection will get much better. Again, it's not up to us, it's definitely up to Hopin, and we are working on it. So again, thank you very much, and have a nice rest of the next.
Thanks, Dario.
Thanks, Dario.
Bye, Dario.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.